Hey everyone, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Today we have another Spiceworks partner webinar brought to you by Quorum, Why Moving DR to the Cloud Makes Sense. A few things that I hope everybody checks out. The first is the question box on your screen. It's to the left. Please don't be shy. Just click the submit button and ask your questions. We're going to address those questions at the end of the presentation, and if yours isn't addressed, Quorum will have the chance to follow up with you. Another thing is that we are recording the webinar, so if you have to step out for any reason, it's no big cause for concern. You'll get a link to that recording tomorrow. And now I want to introduce the man of the hour. We have Matt Kern, and he is the Systems Engineer Manager for Quorum. Matt, whenever you're ready.
All right. Thank you so much, Ryan. And thanks to all of you for joining us here today. I realize how busy working in IT is, haven't done it for so many years, and your time is valuable to me. Today we're going to be talking about why moving DR to the cloud makes sense. We're going to look at the history of disaster recovery, and after that we're going to start looking at the increasing DR requirements, that always-on business. You know, the folks that you work for, they simply don't like the idea of being down for a minute, much less hours or days. I'm going to talk about what DRaaS, or Disaster Recovery as a Service, actually is, and what it should do for you. I'm also going to go through the rudimentary steps on how do you get there, and the underpinnings, the technological underpinnings of any DRaaS solution. We're going to walk through deploying and utilizing your DRaaS, and then growing with your DRaaS. I'm also going to reinforce the key recommendations at the end. So let's look at the history of DR. For years, disaster recovery has meant off-site tapes. Well, tapes were built on it's about a 50-year-old technology now, and although it is cost efficient, any of you that have ever had to restore an entire server from tape or even from a disk backup realizes the amount of time and the difficulty, especially if you have to restore to, say, different hardware. So as a disaster recovery medium, being down for hours and days, tape's kind of losing favor in the marketplace now. About 10 years ago, I started deploying replicated data centers. This is a great way to do DR. When I deployed for JP Morgan Chase, we basically had a data center in Columbus replicating to a data center in Chicago and also to Jersey City. At Jersey City there was also the tapes, so we ran our tapes there and everything was already off-site because we'd replicated. The reason that we did this wasn't so much, boy, we were really, really concerned. It was more that the government came in and said, hey, you know, you have to, for every financial transaction, write it in two places. Now, this made still for a great DR setup. However, for the mid-market, it was very, very difficult. About 7 or 8 years ago, I started deploying these in mid-sized companies, replicated data centers. I would specify a system. I would show up, slice and dice a SAN, maybe stand up some ESX servers, move data to the SAN, replicate the SAN, and do a backup solution in there too at times. What I found was radically different as far as the perception from the mid-market. From JP Morgan Chase's standpoint, they were ecstatic. The mid-market, on the other hand, did not have the wealth of IT resources. They didn't have the 50 DBAs. They didn't have the 100 virtualization experts, the 50 SAN experts at their disposal. So, in the mid-market, I would set everything up and it would be fine until something changed in the environment. Well, once that change occurred, stuff stopped working. In other words, they didn't have the resources or the know-how to handle a complex replicated data center. Now recently I've been hearing a lot about cloud backup. Cloud backup as a mechanism of backup, as long as you can get your first backup up there, takes a lot of bandwidth, is not a bad way to go for disaster, or for backup I should say, but don't confuse that with disaster recovery. In case of a disaster, you would call them up, say a giant rock fell on one of your servers. You would call them up and they'd say, oh, sorry about that. We will FedEx you overnight a USB drive for you to do your restore on. So you're down till tomorrow, at least. Tomorrow morning at 10:30, you can start your restore. So cloud backup for DR definitely has some holes. When we look at the landscape of disaster recovery, we also need to look at the other side of it and those increasing disaster recovery requirements. First and foremost, those higher service level agreements are expected by management. There's also something that I could call the management disconnect. So whenever I start a disaster recovery project, I'll typically engage management and ask a simple question. How long can you be down? And how much data can you afford to lose? The answer is always the same. I can't be down for a second, and I can't lose any data. Now, certainly in IT, we know that we can give those types of solutions. Unfortunately, it's going to cost a pretty penny. Once I outline that to management, typically we start having a real discussion. More on that later. Another management disconnect is that they think backup is easy and is always completed. Anybody that's ever had to do backup for any extended period of time realizes that's not the case. It's a nice way of saying we're really not meeting our SLAs because of backup failures, media failures, problems at the source or target. That management disconnect is actually in two places, not only the C-level executives at your company, but also sometimes in upper IT management. Those that have gotten away from the day-to-day, getting their fingers dirty, and actually doing the backup, and it's been so long, they've never had to back up a terabyte and realize the problems with just backing up 1 terabyte, much less 10, 20, or 40 terabytes. Those increasing DR requirements come at the same time when increasing your IT staffing levels is virtually impossible. So go back to my previous slide when we were talking about a replicated data center. Do you really want to have double what you have today, in other words, all your stuff here, and that same infrastructure replicated somewhere else, and think you're going to be not going to be increasing your workload? You've just doubled your amount of infrastructure. It's going to obviously take a toll on the number of hours that you need to work. Also, anybody that's got a remote data center realizes the difficulty in monitoring that remote data center. Sometimes you physically need to be in front of those computers. So you've got to hop in your car and maybe go to that data center if it's close enough, or if it's geographically dispersed, you need to hire smart hands, as they're called in the business, and that comes at a considerable cost. Finally, DR testing is so time-consuming. Ages ago, I actually did a DR test where we took all of our tapes out to SunGuard, and I was on the Windows team. The mainframe guys and the Unix guys came along with us. It was just like a real disaster, except we stopped off for coffee and donuts first. We walked in with our tapes. The folks at SunGuard said, there's your equipment. Go ahead, do your DR test. The mainframe guys, out of there in 4 hours, no problem. The Unix guys, about a day. They were out of there. We'll see you later. About midway through the following day, as myself and the other 2 members of the Windows teams were trying to do our restores with a very low level of success, we came to the realization this is not going to work. So we spent 2 days figuring out, hey, this DR plan with tapes is just not going to work. It's not that, and for those of you that haven't done a DR test, don't feel bad. Most small to medium-sized businesses have it. They don't have that SunGuard contract. They don't have duplicate equipment where they could do a full DR test. So the DR plan is to, boy, I hope that never happens. So let's talk about DRAS. So DRAS, as it stands, is remote backup, and that includes archiving. But more importantly, remote clones of those critical servers. You've got to have those remote clones so you don't have to do a restore. In other words, I still need my backup, I still need my archive, maybe for 7 years, or if I've got some sort of legal need to keep items. I need the data, but I also need the servers on just sitting there ready to go. And that's what DRAS gives you, the backup plus clones of those critical servers. So what should your DRAS service do? Number one, it should be easy to use. Think to my previous slide about the IT staffing levels. You need the DR, but I don't want to double the amount of equipment that I need, double the amount of servers that I need to tend to. The underpinning here is automation. Everything should be automated, from the backup to the clone creation to the replication. Everything should be automated end to end. It also should be unified and holistic. And by that I mean, if I've got some Linux servers or I've got some physical servers and virtual servers, I shouldn't have point solutions for each one of them. In the event of a disaster, and I've been through one, and there's kind of a fog of war. You don't have all the information that you need to make decisions. However, the circumstances are forcing you to make decisions with less than optimum information. That's where you want that easy to use and unified. I don't want to have to go to site A with my VMware backups, and then another site with my Linux physical machines, and another site with my Windows physical. No, I need something that's unified. It should be non-invasive. In other words, I shouldn't be loading down any of my existing infrastructure, stealing IOPS from my SAN, and lessening my performance, for example. Everything should be basically out of band. It should be scalable and scalable easily. The remote site should include expert monitoring. Again, during normal day-to-day operations, you're not having a disaster, but you need to be sure that if you need to flip that switch, that everything's going to work. You need that expert monitoring on your remote DRAS sites. It should be easily tested. Expert monitoring is great, and I'm a trusting person, but I still like to be sure. I want to be able to flip on all those machines whenever I like and verify, yes, my DR plan is safe. It should be a quick deployment. These subscription services start running their billing clock day one. You should be up and running within 2 weeks from the start of any project. If someone comes to you and says, yep, we're going to set up your DRAS and it's going to take a month, 2 months, 3 months, no. No, because only if you have that quick deployment are you going to get your fast ROI. How do I get there? Well, strangely enough, just like any DR or any backup project, you have to start where you define the RTO and RPO, the recovery time objective and the recovery point objective. This is an incredibly important discussion to have with management because it allows you to control that management disconnect. Typically, what you're going to do is have that first discussion, as I mentioned earlier, and they're going to say, I can't lose nothing, and I can't be down for a second. And then they'll say, wow, that's pretty expensive. Well, on second thought, my core business might be these 10 servers, these 40 servers, and the other servers I can do later. In other words, I can afford for them to be down for X amount of hours or X amount of days. For example, your virtual center or your vSphere server. Well, my virtual infrastructure is gone. Why do I need a vSphere server? I need to be able to restore it, but I don't need it right now because my virtual machines, in case of a disaster, they're probably gone. That's where we start to find these different buckets. And you have your Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 buckets. Tier 1, I got to have these things on within 10 minutes of my disaster. They have to spin up, and they have to be available. Tier 2, well, I can actually basically just do a restore of these to different hardware, and you know these I could be down for a little while longer. Tier 3, longer still. You also need to keep in mind, whatever solution you go with, to set your performance requirements for your production servers. That's where that non-invasive comes in. In other words, I need to know that if I deploy solution X and it's on the same SAN, or I'm replicating a SAN and it's dragging my local SAN down, I need to be sure that I'm not going to suffer poor performance on my critical applications just because of my DR solution. So set those minimum requirements for your production servers. Define your performance requirements for your DR servers. In the case of finance, in the case of law, it's got to be close to 100%, if not 100%. In other words, all the knowledge workers are going to go back to work. Manufacturing, that could be a little bit different. In other words, well, we still have some work to do, but most of the folks, our plant may be disabled, so I need lesser. So define the performance requirements on those DR servers and give it some good thought. Of course, you're going to need geographic separation. If I were to deploy a DR solution across the street, that certainly would not help if there was a regional disaster. Finally, you need to define your failback requirements. In other words, all right, I've had a disaster. Now, how do I get back to normal operations? And how do I get back to normal operations without yet another service disruption? Let's look at the mechanisms for Cloud DR. Number one is bandwidth, and that bandwidth is the bandwidth that your company can provide to replicate the changing data off-site. In my years, this has been the number one determining factor for your SLA. In other words, how many times a day can I get my ERP SQL database, those changes, off my site and replicated to a remote site? Very, very important. So if you've got 10 terabytes of data and you've got a T1 that's 90% utilized, you're not going to be able to replicate hourly snapshots to a remote site. You don't have the bandwidth to do so. So keep in mind that bandwidth as a pretty big restriction. Additionally, whatever solution you go with should allow you to throttle your bandwidth as you see fit. For example, if you normally hit a spike of 90% first thing in the morning, then you should basically be able to turn off that replication from your local site to the remote DRAS site and then turn it back on once bandwidth becomes available. Deduplication. Now, deduplication is a key technology to look for. Nothing will help you overcome spotty bandwidth or bandwidth, low bandwidth like deduplication. That deduplication should take place at 2 points. Number one, server-based. Server-based deduplication, where we're only going to send, say, small slices of changed or new data to your backup repository, allows for faster backups. Those faster backups, in turn, allow you to provide a better SLA for your business. Additionally, you need global deduplication. If you don't have global deduplication, your bandwidth gets gobbled up. It gets gobbled up every patch Tuesday because you've got 25 servers that got the same 25 patches trying to, all 25, trying to send them out through your bandwidth. Well, it's not going to work. That's why you need the global deduplication. That's going to lessen any help lesson. It's not going to turn water into wine, but it's going to lessen your bandwidth needs. Finally, security. With Heartbleed, the huge IE bug, security is at the front of everybody's mind. Look for a solution where all data in motion is encrypted. Every last byte of it should be encrypted. Look for the optional data at rest encryption. The data at rest encryption is typically needed when we come into some sort of regulatory compliance. You should have that option. The data at rest encryption should not affect the performance of your ready-to-run clones. In other words, just because you choose to encrypt your data, or it was chosen for you by regulatory compliance, that does not mean that all your servers should run slowly. Virtual clones of your physical or virtual servers. Now, I've said this over and over again. The backup is not good enough. I need clones of these servers. Now, those servers should be hypervisor agnostic. If I'm running some Hyper-V, some VMware, some Zen, whatever, it shouldn't care. Additionally, it shouldn't care if it was physical or virtual servers. Even if you're all virtualized now, you may get a requirement for an application which can't run on a virtual due to performance concerns. And if you've got a virtual only DR solution, well, now that just became a point solution for you. It should be hypervisor agnostic, OS agnostic. It should run Windows and Linux, and physical and virtual servers. The network reconfiguration, absolutely key. Now think about this. So let's just say that you were hosting your own DR site. So maybe you've got another site 100 miles away or whatever. That's going to cause some issues when you boot up your clones. Your local subnet is, for example, 192.168.1.0, and the remote is 2.0. Well, all those clones are going to come up, and they're not going to be routable. I'm going to have to do a little network wizardry to get everything up and running. Make sure that any DRAS solution you look at has got remote subnet translation so that everything's going to come up and it's going to appear to your end users like their original subnet. Additionally, the workforce must have a simple way to connect. You shouldn't need to deploy any complex packages, etc., because in the case of a disaster, you may have folks spread out, working out of home, working out of a temporary office, etc. It's going to be very difficult to get everybody connected. So make sure that it's very, very simple for them to connect. I'm going to say that word again, automation. Everything should be automated. The backup, the replication, the testing of those clones, automatically booting them up and verifying, hey, this is ready to go in case the worst happens. Archiving, everything should be automated end to end. This is going to keep the overhead on the IT staff down, and the automation is also going to provide a simplicity that is going to make your DR go, if the worst happens, make it go a lot smoother. So when you deploy a DRAS, what should you look for? Number one, it should be seeded out of band. If you've got a terabyte of data and you've got a 3 meg up connection, good luck on getting that initial seed. There should be a local out-of-band seeding process to make that easier and take it off your network resources. Insist on training. You should be fully versed on how to do a DR within 24 hours of the finalization of your project. You should know how to do it inside and out. Those best practices should be reviewed because guess what? Your environment's going to change. You should know how to change with it. And learn how to do your own DR tests. A plan not tested is not a plan. Now, once you have a DRAS, there's a lot of things you can do with it that, frankly, may not be top of mind. Of course, you can do your DR testing. Now, I recommend a DR test at least once a quarter. The clones are already there at the remote site. All you have to do is turn them on and verify everything is working. As we know, change is a constant in our IT environments. By doing your DR test, you're going to ensure that A, everything's working, but B, more importantly, all your dependencies are accounted for. got to have the ability to ensure that, oh, wow, that middleware server, I forgot about him. Yep, I need to put that in my DR plan. It's going to shake out all those dependencies and ensure that you're covered in case of a disaster. It's also for those that have to go through internal or external DR audits, a great way to show your DR plan. Literally show it, not hand them a piece of paper and say, here's my DR plan, and hope they don't read it. But literally bring up all these remote clones of all your servers and say, here's my entire environment. What do you want to see work? Now, since it's constantly getting updated, it becomes the perfect test lab, too. So even when I'm not having a disaster, there's still great value. This gives me a place to test software patches, test upgrades, and test migrations. Because it's off-site, it's not going to disrupt my SLAs. Additionally, monitoring. Again, I'm a trusting person, but I still like to verify. Verify that those service levels are being met by whatever DRAS vendor you select. Growing with your DRAS. Again, we know that change in IT is a constant. It's always there. It's always going to be there. More importantly, large changes in the environment happen from time to time. For example, I was with a company that bought another company. All of a sudden, I didn't have, it was the same IT staff, and we had twice as much stuff in 2 locations. And that was in one day. Huge amount of change. So, verify that you can grow your storage, that you can grow your CPU, memory, network resources as needed. They should be elastic and flexible. Additionally, there should be no bait and switch. In other words, if you buy your DRAS service for these servers at rate X, there shouldn't be a 2X when you need to expand it. It should be linear. So always keep in mind the need to grow with your DRAS. So just to kind of reinforce a couple of the key recommendations here, don't be afraid to investigate new technologies. Automation is the key. Select vendors with a long-term vision for recovery, not for backup, because we're not talking about backup here. We're talking about recovery. Implement a tiered recovery, multi-layer SLAs for both backup and instant recovery. Finally, always be testing. Constantly be testing to understand that A, it's going to work, and B, that your DRAS vendor is meeting his SLAs. That's it. Ryan, do we have any questions? Any questions coming in yet?
Yeah, we do. So you're not quite off the hook yet. And we still have so many people on the line, so I'm expecting to see some more questions come through as well. Again, to all our audience members, this is a chance to shoot any questions Matt's way, so we encourage them. How should I size my DRAS environment? By total storage?
That's a real good question, and I think what we're looking at here is not creating a remote backup where I need to restore, in other words, by total storage. But I need to have a remote virtual environment, close my physical virtual servers, clones of my Windows and Linux servers. So I need to ensure I have enough compute resources, memory resources, network resources, disk IOPS to run all of those machines. As a matter of fact, that's a real good way to figure out if a customer, or excuse me, if a vendor has a long-term focus on recovery. If they're saying, hey, yeah, we can do all this and create clones out there, but their only question to you is how much data do you want to back up? They're a backup company. If they come to you and say, hey, I really need to do what amounts to a virtualization assessment of your environment, then they're actually concerned about the performance of all those clones. They're focused on recovery. Hopefully that answered that question.
All right. And I'm just going to give it a few more moments here, but I think that is pretty much going to shut us down for today's presentation. Matt, do you have anything else you'd like to say? Are there any resources maybe for our audience members to check out after this presentation?
Certainly you can go to www.quorum.net. We've got many different white papers, success stories, technology overviews, and I am also available for any follow-up questions at matt.kern@quorum.net.
Great. Thanks so much, Matt, for sharing that with us, and thanks to all our audience members for hanging out with us. We still had so many people on the line by the end of this year, so Matt, congrats on a very engaging presentation. I know we were joking earlier. You said that I had more faith in you than you did, but you ended up rocking the presentation, so good job. Pat on the back for you. We even just got a thanks come through. So So thanks, Matt, and I just hope everyone has a good afternoon. And just a reminder, you'll get a link to that recording tomorrow.
Thanks, everybody, for your valuable time. Have a great afternoon.